A gentle mathematics teacher standing in her classroom, her favorite cream-colored cardigan hanging in tatters around her shoulders while teenage bullies laugh at their destruction, their cruel satisfaction echoing off the walls as she trembles. Not from fear, but from the tremendous effort it takes to suppress reflexes that could end this humiliation in seconds. What these arrogant students didn't know was that their soft-spoken target had once thrown opponents twice her size across competition mats in under 3 seconds. They had no idea that the woman they were tormenting had earned a black belt in Judo before she could legally drive. They couldn't have imagined that their quiet teacher had walked away from international competition after a training accident that haunted her dreams for 7 years. This is the story of Rachel Martinez, a woman who buried her warrior spirit so deep that even she forgot it existed, until one moment of cruelty awakened something that would change everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rachel Martinez moved through the corridors of Westfield High. School like a shadow, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the polished concrete floors. At 29, she possessed the kind of unassuming presence that allowed her to navigate crowded hallways without students even noticing her passage. Her long black hair was always secured in a neat bun at the base of her neck, and her wardrobe consisted entirely of modest cardigans, comfortable slacks, and sensible flats that reflected her practical approach to professional dress. Behind silver-rimmed glasses, her dark brown eyes held a warmth that made struggling students feel safe to ask questions about quadratic equations or logarithms without fear of judgment. There was something about her patient demeanor that encouraged even the most math-phobic teenagers to attempt problems they would normally avoid. But beneath that gentle exterior lay something else, something she kept carefully locked away in the deepest recesses of her memory. The industrial town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, sat 45 minutes outside Pittsburgh, its economy built on the steel mills and manufacturing plants that had sustained 3 generations of working-class families. With a population of 22,000, it was the kind of place where Friday night football games drew half the town, where everyone knew their neighbor's business, and where change came slowly and was often viewed with suspicion. Westfield High School occupied a sprawling brick complex at the heart of the community, its utilitarian architecture reflecting the no-nonsense values of a town that prized hard work over flash. The school served 1,100 students, representing the children of mill workers, small business owners, and the occasional white-collar professional who chose the slower pace of small-town life over urban opportunities. Rachel had been teaching mathematics at Westfield for 4 years, and in that time she had perfected the art of professional invisibility. She arrived at 6:30 each morning, staying until well past 5 in the evening, conducting her classes with a quiet competence that earned her satisfactory evaluations, but little recognition from administration or colleagues. Her classroom, room 142, was a sanctuary of mathematical order, decorated with colorful posters about problem-solving, strategies, and student work that she displayed with meticulous care. She had created an environment where even students who claimed to hate math found themselves engaged with algebraic concepts and geometric proofs, drawn in by her genuine enthusiasm for helping them discover that mathematics was less about memorization and more about logical thinking and pattern recognition. Her approach emphasized understanding over speed, encouraging students to explain their reasoning rather than simply producing correct answers. The only person who seemed to truly see Rachel was David Chun, the physics teacher whose classroom was directly across the hall from hers. David was everything Rachel appeared not to be: outgoing, confident, and quick with a joke that could diffuse tension in any faculty meeting. His booming laugh could be heard from 2 corridors away, and his enthusiasm for both science and his students made him one of the most popular teachers in the building, despite their apparent differences. David had taken Rachel under his wing from her first day at Westfield, sensing something in her quiet demeanor that reminded him of the gifted students he had spent his career encouraging to pursue their potential. What he didn't know, what nobody at Westfield knew, was that their mild-mannered mathematics teacher had once been ranked third in the nation in her weight class for judo competition. Hidden away in the back of her bedroom closet, wrapped in old quilts and pushed behind winter coats she rarely wore, sat a collection of medals and trophies that told a very different story about Rachel Martinez. State championships, regional tournaments, national rankings, all accumulated during a 12-year career that had ended abruptly when she was 22 years old. The sports journalists had called her the silent storm for her ability to remain completely calm while systematically dismantling opponents who outweighed her by 20 or 30 pounds. Her sensei, Master James Watanabe, had been preparing her for Olympic trials when everything changed in a single devastating moment during what should have been a routine training session. The accident, though it had been ruled exactly that by officials and witnesses, had shattered something fundamental in Rachel's understanding of herself and her capabilities. Her training partner, a skilled judoka named Amanda Foster, had been practicing a complex throwing technique when Rachel's defensive counter had connected with unexpected force and timing. The sound of Amanda's shoulders separating had echoed through the training center like a gunshot, and the sight of her friend writhing in pain on the mat had burned itself into Rachel's memory with photographic clarity. Amanda had recovered completely after 6 months of physical therapy and had even returned to competition the following year. But for Rachel, that moment had destroyed her relationship with the sport that had defined her identity since childhood. She had walked away from judo that very night, ignoring Master Watanabe's pleas and her parents' concerns about abandoning something that had brought structure and purpose to her entire existence. The medals went into storage. The GI was donated to the local youth center, and Rachel Martinez the judoka became Rachel Martinez the teacher, dedicating herself to nurturing young minds instead of honing her body into an instrument of controlled aggression. She had convinced herself that this quieter life was what she wanted, that helping teenagers understand mathematical concepts was a more meaningful way to spend her days than perfecting techniques designed to defeat opponents. Her mother, Elena Martinez, worried constantly about the dramatic change in her daughter's personality. The confident, focused young woman who had once commanded respect on competition mats across 3 states had been replaced by someone who seemed almost afraid of her own capabilities. Elena had tried countless times to encourage Rachel to at least visit her old training center, to reconnect with the passion that had once burned so brightly in her eyes. But Rachel always deflected these conversations with a gentle firmness that brooked no argument. She had made her choice, she would say, and she was content with her new life. The truth was more complicated than contentment. Rachel wasn't unhappy exactly, but she often felt like she was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit, playing a role that required her to constantly monitor and suppress parts of herself that had once been as natural as breathing. When she watched action movies, her hands would unconsciously move through the motions of grips and throws. When she heard about violence in the news, her mind would automatically analyze the situation tactically, calculating leverage points and defensive positions. The judoka was still there, buried beneath layers of cardigans and careful restraint. But Rachel had become so skilled at ignoring that part of herself that she genuinely believed it was gone forever. Her students at Westfield saw only the gentle, soft-spoken woman who made algebra accessible and listened patiently to their academic struggles. Rachel had a particular gift for reaching the kids who felt overwhelmed by mathematical concepts, perhaps because she understood what it felt like to hide your true capabilities from the world. She stayed after school to provide extra help, wrote encouraging comments on assignments that other teachers might have graded quickly, and created innovative lesson plans that allowed students to approach problems from multiple angles. This dedication to her students' success made what was about to happen all the more shocking, both to Rachel and to the few people who thought they knew her. Because while Rachel had successfully hidden her past from her colleagues and students, she had not succeeded in making herself invisible to the sort of people who enjoyed causing pain to those they perceived as vulnerable. She was about to discover that some situations cannot be resolved with patience and understanding, and that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to remember who you used to be. The trouble had been building for several weeks, though Rachel had tried to address it through the proper administrative channels with her characteristic faith in institutional procedures and professional communication. It had started small, as these things often do, with a group of junior students who seemed to take particular pleasure in testing the boundaries of acceptable classroom behavior. Marcus Williams was the ringleader, a 16-year-old with a kind of natural charisma that could inspire either great loyalty or great mischief, and he had unfortunately chosen the latter path. Tall and athletic with closely cropped hair and an easy smile that masked a cruel streak, Marcus came from one of Millbrook's more prominent families. His father owned the largest auto dealership in town and served on the city council, connections that had given Marcus a sense of immunity that had only grown stronger as he progressed through high school without facing real consequences for his increasingly aggressive behavior. He had gathered around him a group of like-minded followers: Jason Torres, whose quick temper and willingness to escalate any confrontation made him Marcus's perfect enforcer; Kevin Murphy, who documented their exploits on social media with the detached enthusiasm of someone filming entertainment; and Ryan Beck, whose specialty was psychological intimidation and who seemed to derive genuine pleasure from making others uncomfortable. Together, they had turned disrupting Rachel's Algebra 2 class into a form of twisted entertainment, starting with small infractions like talking during instruction and gradually escalating to more blatant disrespect. They would make sarcastic comments during problem-solving sessions, challenge her authority in front of other students, and create an atmosphere of tension that made it difficult for anyone else to focus on learning. Rachel had tried every approach she could think of to address the situation professionally. She had spoken with them individually after class, documenting their responses. She had called their parents, though those conversations had been largely unproductive. She had submitted detailed incident reports to the administration, following every protocol outlined in the faculty handbook. Principal Sandra Walsh, a harried woman in her mid-50s who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by the demands of managing 1,100 teenagers, had listened to Rachel's concerns with the sort of polite attention that suggested she had more pressing matters demanding her focus. Boys would be boys, she had explained, and perhaps Rachel needed to establish firmer classroom management techniques. After all, Marcus Williams was a star on the basketball team and came from a respected family, while Jason Torres was dealing with his parents' messy divorce and perhaps needed understanding rather than discipline. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This response had left Rachel feeling frustrated and unsupported, but she had accepted it with the same quiet resignation that had characterized much of her adult life since leaving Judo. She would find a way to reach these students, she told herself, because that was what good teachers did. She would show them that mathematics could be engaging and relevant to their lives, and eventually their behavior would improve. She refused to acknowledge the small voice in the back of her mind that whispered about other, more direct ways to handle bullies, ways that her former self would have employed without hesitation. David Chun had been less diplomatic in his assessment of the situation when Rachel had finally confided in him during their shared lunch period. Sitting in the teacher's lounge with its mismatched furniture and perpetually broken vending machine, David had listened to Rachel's careful description of the boy's behavior with growing frustration. He knew Marcus and his friends from the hallways, had seen their arrogant swagger and the way other students gave them a wide berth, and he had observed firsthand how their presence could transform any environment from comfortable to tense. David had offered to speak with the boys himself, using the kind of direct language that sometimes got through to teenage boys better than administrative procedures. But Rachel had declined with typical politeness. She appreciated his concern, she had said, but she needed to handle this situation herself through proper channels and professional methods. She was an educator, not an enforcer, and she believed that patience and understanding could solve most problems if given enough time and consistent application. What Rachel didn't realize was that time was running out, and that Marcus Williams had interpreted her gentle responses to his behavior as confirmation of weakness rather than evidence of professionalism. In his mind, he had found the perfect target, someone who would absorb his cruelty without fighting back, someone whose obvious discomfort fed his need to feel powerful and in control. He had begun planning something that would humiliate Rachel so thoroughly that the story would spread throughout the school, cementing his reputation as someone who could get away with anything while simultaneously destroying her authority in the classroom. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal truths about both the gentle mathematics teacher and the cocky teenager who thought he had her completely figured out. Neither of them knew that they were about to become part of a story that would be talked about in Millbrook for years to come, though for very different reasons than either of them expected. Rachel was about to learn that some parts of yourself can be buried but never truly destroyed. And Marcus was about to discover that the quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness was actually something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Rachel's apartment on Elm Street reflected the same careful neutrality that characterized her professional persona. The modest two-bedroom unit was furnished with pieces from discount retailers, creating an environment that felt safe but unremarkable. Mathematical journals and educational texts lined every available bookshelf, creating an intellectual fortress that insulated her from memories she preferred to keep buried. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet teacher who always offered polite greetings, but never lingered for extended conversations. She received packages from online bookstores with clockwork regularity, and her apartment lights were always out by 10 o'clock sharp. What they couldn't see was the carefully concealed room that housed the remnants of her former life. Behind a false panel that she had installed herself during her first week in the apartment lay a shrine to achievements she could never quite bring herself to destroy. The space was cramped, barely large enough to stand upright, but it contained the physical evidence of over a decade of dedication to judo excellence. Trophies from local competitions to national championships lined improvised shelves, their bronze, silver, and gold figures frozen in throwing positions that Rachel's muscles still remembered with startling clarity. Photographs showed a different version of herself, confident, fierce, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail as she posed with medals and certificates that documented her rise through the ranks of competitive judo. The transformation from that assured athlete to the woman who now spent her evenings grading papers and preparing lesson plans had been gradual but deliberate. The journey had begun when Rachel was 7 years old, a shy child struggling with coordination and confidence issues that worried her parents. Elena and Roberto Martinez had enrolled their daughter in the local judo program at the Millbrook Community Center, hoping that martial arts training might help her develop better balance and self-assurance. They never imagined they were unleashing a natural talent that would dominate regional competition for the next 15 years. Master James Watanabe had recognized Rachel's potential during her first month of training. Unlike many young students who relied on strength or aggression, Rachel displayed an intuitive understanding of leverage, timing, and spatial relationships that made her techniques unusually effective for her size and age. She absorbed instruction like a sponge, practicing movements until they became as natural as walking. By age 10, she was competing in regional tournaments and winning divisions against opponents who had been training longer. By 13, she was traveling to national competitions where her reputation as the Silent Storm began to develop. Opponents and spectators were consistently amazed by her ability to remain completely calm while systematically dismantling competitors who appeared stronger and more aggressive. The nickname came from a particularly memorable match at the Junior National Championships when she was 15. Facing an opponent who outweighed her by 25 pounds and had been trash-talking throughout the warm-up period, Rachel had remained absolutely silent and expressionless. When the match began, she executed a perfect Tayotoshi that sent her opponent flying across the mat in under 30 seconds. The victory was so clean and decisive that the arena fell completely silent before erupting in applause. Master Watanabe had structured Rachel's training around this natural gift for maintaining composure under pressure. Their sessions focused not just on technique development, but on mental discipline, breathing control, and the philosophical aspects of judo that emphasized using an opponent's energy against them rather than meeting force with force. These lessons went far beyond physical technique to encompass life principles about patience, timing, and the strategic value of appearing weak while actually being strong. The training regimen was intensive, requiring 3 hours of practice, 6 days a week, along with strength conditioning, flexibility work, and mental preparation through meditation and visualization exercises. Rachel's teenage years were structured around competition schedules that took her across the country, where she faced the best young judokas in America, while maintaining honor roll grades and preparing for college applications. Her parents had initially worried that the demanding schedule might interfere with her education, but Rachel's discipline on the mat translated into exceptional academic performance. The same mental focus that allowed her to remain calm during high-pressure matches helped her excel in mathematics and science courses. She discovered that the logical thinking required for complex judo techniques complemented her natural aptitude for problem-solving in academic subjects. The college years at Penn State had represented the pinnacle of her competitive career. Training with the university's nationally ranked judo team while pursuing a mathematics degree, Rachel refined her techniques to Olympic-level precision. She specialized in throwing techniques that exploited opponents' forward momentum, using their aggression and strength against them in ways that often appeared almost magical to spectators unfamiliar with judo principles. Master Watanabe had been preparing her for Olympic trials during her senior year when the accident occurred. It happened during a routine training session on a Tuesday evening in March, under circumstances that had been replicated thousands of times without incident. Amanda Foster, her regular training partner and closest friend on the team, was practicing a complex foot sweep that required precise timing and coordination. The technique should have been straightforward. Amanda would attack with an o-ukigari, and Rachel would counter with her signature Tayotoshi. They had performed this sequence countless times, using it to develop timing and defensive reflexes. But something went wrong with the spacing and timing that night. Some microscopic miscalculation that turned a controlled practice session into a moment of devastating impact. Rachel's counter technique connected with Amanda's shoulder joint at exactly the wrong angle, applying torque and pressure that exceeded the joint's structural limits. The sound of ligaments tearing and bones separating was sickeningly loud in the quiet training center, followed immediately by Amanda's scream of pain that seemed to echo off the walls for an eternity. The sight of her best friend clutching her dislocated shoulder while writhing on the mat had shattered something fundamental in Rachel's understanding of herself and her capabilities. She had trained for years to control her techniques with surgical precision, to apply exactly the amount of force necessary to achieve victory without causing unnecessary injury. The idea that she could hurt someone she cared about, even accidentally, challenged everything she believed about her ability to manage and direct her physical power. Amanda's injury required surgery to repair torn ligaments and reposition the shoulder joint, followed by 6 months of physical therapy and rehabilitation. She made a complete recovery and returned to competition the following year, even sending Rachel encouraging messages during the recovery process. But for Rachel, watching the emergency medical technicians immobilize her friend's arm and transport her to the hospital had created a trauma response that she couldn't overcome. She tried to return to training after Amanda's surgery, but every technique felt dangerous and unpredictable. The confidence and natural flow that had characterized her judo for 15 years was replaced by hesitation and second-guessing that made effective technique impossible. Master Watanabe worked patiently with her, trying to rebuild her mental approach to training, but Rachel couldn't shake the image of Amanda's injury or the fear that she might cause similar harm to another training partner. The decision to walk away from judo had been made during a late-night conversation with her parents in their kitchen 3 weeks after the accident. Through tears that she had been holding back for days, Rachel explained that she could no longer trust herself on the mat, that the risk of hurting someone else was more than she could bear. The sport that had given her identity, purpose, and direction for most of her life suddenly felt like a liability rather than a gift. Elena and Roberto had tried to convince their daughter to take time off rather than making a permanent decision, but Rachel's mind was made up. She walked into Master Watanabe's office the next morning and formally withdrew from the team, declining his offers to provide counseling or alternative training approaches that might help her work through the trauma. The transition from competitive athlete to regular college student had been jarring and disorienting. Without the structure of daily training and the clear goals of competition preparation, Rachel felt unmoored and directionless. She threw herself into her mathematics coursework with desperate intensity, using academic challenges as a substitute for the physical and mental demands that judo had provided. Her grades improved dramatically as she channeled all her competitive energy into scholarly achievement, but she felt hollow and incomplete in ways that academic success couldn't address. The physical confidence and mental discipline that 15 years of judo training had developed didn't disappear overnight, but she began actively suppressing those aspects of herself, viewing them as dangerous remnants of a past she needed to leave behind. The decision to pursue teaching had emerged from her volunteer work tutoring struggling students in mathematics. She discovered that helping others understand complex concepts provided a sense of purpose and accomplishment that reminded her of the satisfaction she had once found in mastering new judo techniques. Education offered a way to use her analytical mind and patient disposition in service of goals that felt meaningful and constructive. The teaching credential program had been challenging but rewarding, giving Rachel new frameworks for understanding how people learn and develop. She specialized in techniques for reaching students who struggled with mathematical anxiety, drawing unconsciously on her judo training's emphasis on patience, persistence, and breaking complex skills into manageable components. Her student teaching experience at a Philadelphia high school had confirmed that she had found her calling, but it had also highlighted the ongoing challenge of integrating her past and present identities. When confronted with disruptive students or challenging classroom situations, she sometimes felt the old reflexes stirring, the automatic assessment of threats and potential responses that had been ingrained through years of competition training. She learned to redirect those impulses into more appropriate responses, using her understanding of psychological pressure and mental preparation to maintain calm authority in chaotic situations. But the constant effort of monitoring and suppressing her instinctive reactions was exhausting, creating an internal tension that never fully resolved. The move to Millbrook after graduation had been motivated partly by a desire for a fresh start. In a community where no one knew about her athletic background, she crafted a carefully edited personal history that emphasized her academic achievements while omitting any mention of judo competition. Job interviews focused on her teaching philosophy and classroom management strategies, with no discussion of the physical and mental disciplines that had shaped her character. The apartment on Elm Street became her refuge from the world, a place where she could safely maintain the hidden shrine to her former life while presenting a completely different face to her colleagues and students. The evening routines of grading papers and preparing lessons provided structure that replaced the training schedules that had once organized her days. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet and her mind wandered, Rachel sometimes found herself moving through kata sequences in her living room, her body remembering forms and techniques with startling clarity. These moments of reconnection with her physical capabilities were both comforting and troubling, reminders of abilities she had chosen to abandon, but could never completely erase, the isolation and emotional suppression that characterized her. Life in Millbrook was taking its toll in ways she was reluctant to acknowledge. She had no close friendships outside of her superficial professional relationship with David Chun, no romantic connection since college, and no physical outlets for the energy and discipline that had once found expression through rigorous training. She had created a life that was safe and predictable, but it was also increasingly lonely and emotionally sterile. The vibrant, confident young woman who had once commanded respect on competition mats had been replaced by someone who seemed almost afraid of her own capabilities, living in constant awareness of the power she possessed but could never safely use. This carefully maintained separation between her past and present was about to be shattered by circumstances that would force Rachel to confront the fundamental question she had been avoiding for 7 years: whether it was possible to completely abandon such a fundamental part of her identity, or whether some aspects of yourself could be buried, but never truly destroyed. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter as students shuffled into Rachel's third period Algebra 2 class, their conversations dying to whispers as they took their seats. The classroom had developed an undercurrent of tension over the past few weeks that even the most oblivious students could sense. What had once been a comfortable learning environment now felt charged with unspoken hostility, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Marcus Williams entered with his usual swagger, flanked by his 3 companions who moved with the coordinated confidence of a pack that had claimed territory. Their presence immediately shifted the atmospheric pressure in room 142. Transforming what should have been an academic space into something that felt more like a battleground. Other students unconsciously adjusted their positions, creating subtle buffers between themselves and the group that had been steadily escalating their campaign of disruption. Rachel stood at the whiteboard, her back straight and her expression carefully neutral as she prepared to introduce the day's lesson on quadratic functions. She had spent considerable time the night before crafting an approach that might engage even reluctant learners, incorporating real-world applications that connected abstract, mathematical concepts to situations her students might actually encounter. But as she turned to face the class, she could feel the familiar weight of hostile attention that had become a constant presence during the third period. The escalation had been methodical and calculated, following a pattern that Marcus had refined through years of testing adult authority figures. It began with small provocations designed to establish dominance while maintaining plausible deniability. Pencils would be dropped repeatedly during instruction, creating disruptions that could be dismissed as accidents. Whispered conversations would continue just long enough to derail Rachel's explanations before stopping the moment she looked directly at the offenders. Jason Torres specialized in the kind of subtle intimidation that was difficult to document but impossible to ignore. He would stare at Rachel with undisguised contempt during her explanations, his body language radiating disrespect in ways that made other students uncomfortable but didn't cross lines that would justify administrative intervention when called upon to participate in class discussions. He would respond with barely concealed sarcasm that stayed just within the boundaries of technical compliance. Kevin Murphy had turned documentation into an art form, using his phone to record Rachel's responses to their provocations. He would capture her moments of frustration or uncertainty, editing clips that made her appear incompetent or unreasonable when shared with friends outside of class. These videos circulated through social media networks with commentary that mocked her teaching style and personal appearance, creating a secondary wave of humiliation that extended far beyond the classroom. Ryan Beck's contributions were psychological, rather than physical, employing the kind of mental warfare that left no visible evidence but created lasting damage to his target's confidence and well-being. He would make comments about Rachel's appearance that bordered on sexual harassment, while maintaining enough ambiguity to avoid clear violations of school policy. His specialty was asking questions that seemed academically legitimate, but were designed to expose gaps in her knowledge or force her into defensive explanations that made her appear weak. The combination of their individual tactics created a hostile environment that affected every student in the classroom. Academic discussions became stilted and uncomfortable as other students hesitated to participate, afraid of drawing negative attention from Marcus's group. The collaborative learning atmosphere that Rachel had worked hard to establish was replaced by an undercurrent of fear and tension that made genuine education nearly impossible. Rachel's attempts to address the situation through official channels had proven frustratingly ineffective. Her documentation was thorough and professional, detailing specific incidents with dates, times, and witness accounts. She had followed every protocol outlined in the faculty handbook, submitting reports to Principal Walsh and requesting parent conferences with methodical persistence. The parent meetings had been particularly disheartening, revealing the sources of the boy's sense of entitlement and immunity from consequences. Marcus's father, Robert Williams, had arrived at his scheduled conference with the dismissive attitude of someone who viewed the entire process as an inconvenience. A successful businessman accustomed to having his concerns prioritized, he had made it clear that he considered Rachel's complaints to be evidence of poor classroom management rather than legitimate behavioral problems. "Boys will be boys," he had said with the casual confidence of someone who had never faced real accountability for his own actions. "Maybe if you could make your class more interesting, they wouldn't need to find their own entertainment." His implication that Rachel was somehow responsible for her students' disrespectful behavior had been delivered with the smooth condescension of someone who had spent years using his economic influence to avoid unpleasant consequences. Jason's mother, Carmen Torres, had been defensive and hostile during her conference, viewing Rachel's concerns as personal attacks on her family rather than legitimate educational issues. Already dealing with the stress of a contentious divorce, she had interpreted the meeting as one more criticism of her parenting abilities. Her response had been to minimize Jason's behavior while suggesting that Rachel's inexperience and cultural differences made her unsuitable for managing diverse student populations. The meeting with Kevin's parents had been professionally cordial, but ultimately unproductive. His father, a middle manager at one of the local manufacturing plants, had listened politely to Rachel's concerns while making it clear that he considered school discipline to be entirely the responsibility of school personnel. Kevin was a good kid who sometimes got carried away with his friends, he had explained, and perhaps Rachel needed to establish clearer boundaries and expectations for classroom behavior. Ryan's parents had failed to appear for their scheduled conference altogether, rescheduling twice before eventually having a brief phone conversation with Principal Walsh that resulted in no meaningful consequences or changes to their son's behavior. The message was clear. Rachel was on her own in dealing with a situation that was steadily deteriorating despite her best efforts to resolve it. Professionally, Principal Walsh's response to Rachel's escalating concerns had been disappointing, but not surprising, given the political realities of managing a public high school in a small community where influential families expected their children to receive preferential treatment. The principal's suggestions focused on improving Rachel's classroom management techniques rather than addressing the fundamental behavioral problems that were making education impossible. Perhaps you could try varying your instructional methods. To better engage these students, Principal Walsh had suggested during their most recent meeting. Some boys need more active participation opportunities to channel their energy constructively. The implication that Rachel's teaching style was somehow responsible for the harassment she was experiencing had been delivered with the practiced diplomacy of an administrator who had learned to avoid confrontations with prominent community members. The suggestion that Rachel attend a weekend workshop on managing challenging student behaviors had felt like a particularly cruel twist, implying that her inability to control students who were deliberately sabotaging her classroom was evidence of professional incompetence rather than recognition that she was dealing with systematic harassment. The workshop fee would come from her own pocket, adding financial insult to the professional injury she was already enduring. David Chun had become increasingly concerned as he observed the changes in Rachel's demeanor and teaching effectiveness. Their hallway conversations revealed growing stress and frustration that was affecting her ability to maintain the positive classroom environment she had worked so hard to establish. Her natural enthusiasm for mathematics was being eroded by the constant need to manage disruptions and document inappropriate behavior. "You don't have to handle this alone," David had told her during one of their lunch conversations in the faculty room. "Some of us have been teaching long enough to know how to deal with kids like Marcus and his crew. A few well-chosen words from the right people might convince them to find other ways to entertain themselves." His offer to intervene informally reflected his recognition that official channels were failing to provide adequate support, but Rachel had maintained her commitment to professional protocols, even as they proved increasingly inadequate for addressing the escalating harassment. "I appreciate your concern, but this needs to be handled through proper channels," she had replied with the same patient determination that had once characterized her approach to mastering complex judo techniques. Education should be about building understanding, not intimidation. What Rachel didn't realize was that her commitment to peaceful resolution was being interpreted by Marcus and his friends as confirmation of weakness rather than evidence of professional integrity. In their adolescent understanding of power dynamics, her failure to respond aggressively to their provocations was proof that she could be pushed indefinitely without meaningful consequences. Marcus had begun planning something that would escalate far beyond their previous pranks, something that would humiliate Rachel so thoroughly that she would either quit or become so demoralized that she would never again dare to challenge their authority. In his mind, he was dealing with a weak adult who needed to be taught her place in the social hierarchy he had constructed around himself. The plan had emerged during a weekend gathering at Marcus's house while his parents were away on a business trip. The four boys had spent hours reviewing Kevin's video collection of Rachel's classroom moments, analyzing her responses to their previous provocations, and identifying vulnerabilities they could exploit. The discussion had taken on the casual cruelty of predators selecting their next victim, with each participant contributing ideas for maximizing psychological damage. "She always wears those stupid cardigans," Ryan had observed, scrolling through Kevin's phone footage. "Like she's trying to hide from the world or something. What if we made it impossible for her to hide?" The suggestion had been delivered with the kind of clinical detachment that made it particularly chilling, as if they were discussing a scientific experiment rather than planning to humiliate a human being. Jason's contribution had focused on timing and execution, drawing on his understanding of Rachel's classroom routines to identify the moment when she would be most vulnerable to attack. "She always turns her back when she's writing on the board during the equation explanations. That's when she's completely focused on math and not paying attention to what we're doing behind her." Kevin's role would be documentation, ensuring that their triumph was preserved for sharing with the broader school community. He had already identified the best camera angles and lighting conditions for capturing high-quality footage that would maximize the humiliation factor while providing evidence of their power over an adult authority figure. The final details had been worked out with the methodical planning that the boys might have applied to a class project, if they had ever cared enough about academics to invest similar effort in legitimate learning. They had rehearsed their positioning and timing, assigned specific roles and responsibilities, and prepared contingency plans for various scenarios they might encounter. What none of them understood was that they were planning to attack someone whose training had included extensive preparation for dealing with multiple opponents in confined spaces. Rachel's years of judo competition had developed reflexes and tactical awareness that operated below the level of conscious thought, automatic responses that had been dormant but never eliminated. The crisp Tuesday morning that would change everything began with Rachel arriving at school early as usual, using the quiet hours before student arrival to prepare materials and center herself for another day of managing escalating tensions. She had spent considerable time the previous evening developing a lesson plan that incorporated hands-on activities designed to engage even reluctant learners, hoping that increased student participation might redirect the negative energy that had been building in her third period class. Her cream-colored cardigan was one of her favorites, a soft wool blend that her mother had given her for her birthday the previous year. It represented the kind of professional appearance she had carefully cultivated, modest and understated, while conveying competence and respectability. She had no way of knowing that it had become a symbol of everything Marcus and his friends despised about her apparent weakness and vulnerability. As students began filtering into room 142 for third period, Rachel noticed an unusual energy among Marcus's group that suggested something was different about their usual dynamic. They positioned themselves with more deliberate spacing than usual, and their whispered conversations had an intensity that made other students unconsciously move away from their immediate vicinity. Emma Rodriguez, one of Rachel's most dedicated students, had noticed the change as well and felt a growing sense of unease that she couldn't quite articulate. Emma had developed genuine affection for her math teacher over the months they had worked together, appreciating Rachel's patient explanations and encouraging approach to learning. The hostile atmosphere that had developed in recent weeks had made Emma increasingly uncomfortable, though she lacked the social power to challenge the boys who were creating the problems. As Rachel turned to write the day's learning objectives on the whiteboard, she felt the familiar prickle of hostile attention that had become a constant presence during the third period. But today there was something different about the quality of that attention, something more focused and predatory that triggered instincts she had been suppressing for 7 years. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the carefully maintained boundaries between Rachel's past and present, forcing her to confront the fundamental question of whether some aspects of identity could ever be truly abandoned or whether they simply waited dormant until circumstances demanded their return. The equation Rachel was writing on the whiteboard represented the quadratic formula in its most elegant form, each variable carefully positioned to demonstrate the mathematical relationships that governed parabolic functions. Her handwriting was precise and measured, reflecting the same attention to detail that had once characterized her judo kata performances. She was completely absorbed in her explanation of how the discriminant determined the nature of a quadratic's roots when she felt the sudden tug at her cardigan. The first pull was gentle, almost tentative, as if Marcus was testing her reaction. Before committing to his planned assault, Rachel paused in her writing, her mathematical mind initially interpreting the sensation as her sweater catching on something. But years of training in spatial awareness, dormant but never eliminated, recognized the deliberate nature of the contact even before her conscious mind processed what was happening. The second pull was harder and more insistent, accompanied by the sound of fabric beginning to strain under pressure. Rachel turned slightly, her movement controlled and measured despite the growing realization that she was under attack. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about how far Marcus Williams was willing to escalate his campaign of harassment. Marcus had positioned himself directly behind her, his hands gripping the back of her cardigan with the focused intensity of someone executing a carefully planned assault. Jason Torres flanked him on the left, his aggressive energy barely contained as he prepared to join the attack. Kevin Murphy held his phone at the optimal angle for recording, his expression showing the detached enthusiasm of someone documenting what he expected to be their greatest triumph. Ryan Beck maintained his position near the classroom door, ready to intercept any potential interference while enjoying the psychological satisfaction of watching their plan unfold. The third pull was violent and devastating, accompanied by the sick sound of wool fibers separating and seams giving way under forces they were never designed to withstand. Rachel's beloved cream-colored cardigan, a birthday gift that represented her mother's love and her own carefully constructed professional image, tore apart in Marcus's hands like tissue paper. The back panel separated completely from the shoulders, while the sleeves hung in tatters that exposed her arms and the simple white blouse she wore. Underneath, the classroom erupted in a mixture of gasps, nervous laughter, and uncomfortable silence as 28 students processed what they were witnessing. Some laughed because they didn't know how else to react to such an unprecedented breach of normal behavior, while others sat in stunned recognition that they were observing something cruel and wrong. Emma Rodriguez felt physically sick as she watched her favorite teacher stand frozen in humiliation, her professional dignity shattered by an act of deliberate cruelty that went far beyond typical teenage mischief. Rachel's first instinct was to gather the destroyed fabric around herself, to minimize her exposure and try to maintain some semblance of the professional appearance that had been so brutally violated. Her hands shook as she pulled the remnants of her cardigan closed, her mind racing through potential responses while her body trembled with a combination of shock, embarrassment, and something else, something deeper and more dangerous that she had spent 7 years learning to suppress. The laughter of Marcus and his friends echoed in her ears like the sound of Amanda Foster's shoulder dislocating all those years ago, a sound that had haunted her dreams and shaped her determination to never again be responsible for causing pain to another human being. But as she stood there facing the class with her professional authority destroyed and her personal dignity violated, Rachel felt something shifting inside her that she had not experienced since that night she walked away from competition. Warrior consciousness that she had buried beneath layers of cardigans and mathematical equations was stirring, responding to threat in ways that 10 years of intensive judo training had programmed into her muscle memory and nervous system. Her breathing began to change, becoming deeper and more controlled as her body automatically assumed a more stable and responsive stance. Though she was not yet consciously aware of the transformation beginning to occur, Marcus was still laughing, still high on his perceived victory, when Rachel turned around to face him with an expression that should have warned him that he had made a terrible miscalculation. Her dark brown eyes, usually warm and encouraging, had taken on a hardness that spoke of capabilities beyond anything he could have imagined. Her posture had shifted in ways so subtle that only someone trained in reading body language for tactical purposes would have recognized the signs. She was no longer simply Rachel Martinez, the gentle mathematics teacher who could be victimized with impunity. She was becoming something else, something that had been sleeping but was now very much awake. The careful separation between her past and present identities was collapsing under the pressure of circumstances that demanded responses her peaceful teaching philosophy could not provide. Emma Rodriguez noticed the change immediately, her own survival instincts recognizing that the dynamic in room 142 had shifted in ways that the laughing boys had not yet perceived. She had seen her teacher disappointed before, had witnessed the quiet frustration Rachel expressed when students failed to engage with mathematical concepts or behaved disrespectfully. But this was something entirely different. This was the look of someone who had been pushed past a boundary that should never have been crossed. Someone who was calculating responses with a precision that suggested capabilities far beyond those of a typical high school mathematics teacher. The transformation was not yet complete, and Rachel was still fighting against instincts that urged her toward responses that her rational mind insisted were inappropriate for a classroom setting. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, her body and mind at war with each other as 7 years of careful self-control battled against reflexes that had been honed through thousands of hours of training. She could feel her muscles coiling with potential energy, her mind automatically assessing angles and distances and vulnerabilities. Her breathing settled into the rhythm that had once preceded every competition, the meditative calm that Master Watanabe had taught her to cultivate before engaging with opponents who sought to use aggression and intimidation to gain psychological advantages. Marcus Williams was still reveling in his apparent success when he noticed that Rachel had not responded in the way he had expected. He had anticipated tears, perhaps, or angry words that would give him an excuse to escalate the confrontation further. Instead, she was looking at him with an intensity that made him suddenly uncomfortable, though his adolescent pride prevented him from acknowledging that he might have misjudged the situation. "What are you going to do about it?" Marcus taunted, his voice carrying the false bravado of someone who was beginning to sense that he might be in over his head, but was too committed to his course of action to back down. "Going to run crying to the principal again? Tell them how the mean students were too much for you to handle?" Jason Torres was starting to recognize that something was wrong, his aggression giving way to uncertainty as he noticed the change in their target's demeanor. But he was committed to following Marcus's lead regardless of his own growing discomfort, his loyalty to the group overriding his individual assessment of the evolving situation. Kevin Murphy continued recording, though he was beginning to realize that what he was capturing might not be the triumphant humiliation of a weak teacher that he had expected to document. There was something about Rachel's stillness that suggested power rather than defeat, something about her focused attention that felt more like a predator assessing prey than a victim cowering from attack. Beck had stopped smiling entirely, his instincts for psychological manipulation, recognizing that he was now dealing with someone who was not responding according to the script they had written for this encounter. The quality of Rachel's attention was unlike anything he had experienced in his previous campaigns of harassment, focused and calculating in ways that made him profoundly uncomfortable. Rachel's internal struggle was reaching a crisis point as she fought to maintain the identity she had carefully constructed while dealing with a situation that her training told her required a very different kind of response. She could feel the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once preceded every match, the sharpening of focus that eliminated everything except the immediate tactical situation, the automatic assessment of threats and available responses that had made her such a formidable competitor. But she was also acutely aware that she was in a classroom full of teenagers, that she was a professional educator with responsibilities that extended far beyond her own desire for justice or revenge. The moment stretched on as Rachel wrestled with decisions that would determine not only her own future, but the futures of everyone in that classroom. The decision was made not by her rational mind, but by Marcus Williams himself, who apparently interpreted her stillness as continued weakness and reached forward to grab the torn fabric of her cardigan again, apparently intending to complete the destruction he had begun. "Look at this," he said to his friends, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "She's just going to stand there and take it like the pathetic little..." His words were cut off abruptly as Rachel's hand moved with the speed and precision that had once earned her the nickname, the Silent Storm. Her grip on his wrist was textbook perfect, applied with just enough pressure to stop his movement instantly while targeting nerve points that sent shooting pains up his arm. The technique was a basic one that she had learned during her first year of training, but executed with the refinement that came from years of competition against opponents who had tried every possible escape. Marcus gasped in surprise and pain. his cocky expression transforming into one of shock and confusion as he tried unsuccessfully to pull his arm free from what appeared to be a mathematics teacher's gentle grip, but was actually something far more formidable. The pressure Rachel was applying was precise and scientifically calculated, preventing him from using his superior size and strength to break free while maintaining perfect control over his movement and positioning. The sudden silence in the classroom was profound and charged with potential energy that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. Tyler Torres's aggressive posture faltered as he witnessed his leader's sudden vulnerability, his teenage brain struggling to process the fact that their soft target had somehow turned the tables in a way that defied everything they thought they knew about power dynamics and social hierarchies. The other students in the classroom were witnessing something that would become a defining memory of their high school experience, though they would struggle for years to articulate exactly what they had seen. Emma Rodriguez later described it as watching a butterfly shed its chrysalis to reveal something far more powerful and magnificent than anyone had imagined possible. Rachel maintained her grip on Marcus's wrist while her awareness expanded to encompass every person and potential threat in room 142 with the kind of comprehensive tactical assessment that had once made her nearly unbeatable in competition. Her breathing had settled into the controlled rhythm that maximized oxygen flow, while maintaining the relaxed alertness that made lightning-fast responses possible. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice carrying a quality of authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter and pay attention in ways that went far beyond typical classroom management. "You have made a serious error in judgment. You have crossed a line that should never be crossed, and your actions have consequences that extend far beyond whatever temporary satisfaction you might have gained from humiliating someone you perceived as weak." Her words were measured and precise, delivered with the kind of calm intensity that made it clear she was completely in control of both herself and the situation. The careful modulation of her voice reflected years of training in mental discipline, the ability to remain centered and focused even under extreme pressure. Jason Torres made the mistake of stepping forward to help his friend, his aggressive nature overriding his growing recognition that the situation had shifted beyond their understanding or control. Rachel's peripheral vision tracked his movement with tactical awareness that had become instinctive after years of facing multiple opponents in training scenarios. Her free hand moved in a simple redirecting motion that intercepted Jason's reaching arm, using his forward momentum against him in a way that sent him stumbling backward into a desk with a crash that echoed through the suddenly tense classroom. The technique was so subtle and economical that many students missed exactly what had happened, seeing only that Jason had somehow lost his balance and fallen while trying to approach their teacher. The demonstration of her ability to control two opponents simultaneously while maintaining perfect composure sent a ripple of shock through the watching students, many of whom were beginning to realize that they were witnessing something unprecedented in their educational experience. Rachel Martinez, mild-mannered mathematics teacher, was revealing capabilities that belonged in an entirely different category of human being. Kevin Murphy's phone continued recording, though he was beginning to understand that he might be documenting something that could have serious legal and disciplinary consequences for everyone involved. The casual prank that was supposed to humiliate a weak teacher had transformed into something far more complex and potentially dangerous, with their intended victim demonstrating physical capabilities that suggested a background none of them had suspected. Ryan Beck had retreated to the back of the classroom, his instincts for psychological manipulation recognizing that he was now dealing with someone who possessed resources and capabilities that rendered his usual tactics not only ineffective but potentially dangerous to employ. His cruel smile had been replaced by careful neutrality as he calculated potential escape routes and responses. Rachel's grip on Marcus's wrist remained precise and unbreakable, a perfect example of the Judo principle that maximum efficiency could be achieved through minimum effort when technique was applied with proper understanding of leverage and anatomy. She could have easily escalated to techniques that would have put him on the ground in considerable pain, but her control remained measured and proportional to the threat he represented. "You will apologize," she continued in the same quiet, authoritative voice. "Not to me, but to every student in this classroom whose education you have disrupted with your need to feel powerful at someone else's expense. You will apologize for creating an environment where learning becomes impossible because everyone is afraid of becoming your next target." Marcus's attempts to pull free only demonstrated the futility of opposing someone who understood leverage and pressure points with scientific precision. His face was reddening, not just from physical discomfort, but from the humiliation of being controlled so effortlessly by someone he had dismissed as weak and vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he gasped, the words forced out by pain and the growing recognition that he was completely at the mercy of someone whose capabilities he had catastrophically misjudged. "I'm sorry to everyone. I didn't know." Rachel maintained her grip for several more seconds, ensuring that the lesson was thoroughly understood by everyone in the room before releasing Marcus's wrist with a final pressure that served as a reminder of her continuing ability to reassert control if necessary. She stepped back to a position that allowed her to monitor all potential threats, while appearing to resume her normal teaching posture. The transformation in Rachel's demeanor was so complete and so unexpected that several students would later describe feeling like they were meeting their teacher for the first time, as if the person they had known for months had been replaced by someone who shared the same appearance but possessed entirely different capabilities and presence. Marcus stumbled backward, rubbing his wrist and staring at Rachel with a mixture of shock, fear, and grudging respect that represented a complete transformation from the arrogant contempt he had displayed just minutes earlier. Jason Torres remained where he had fallen, his aggressive posture replaced by wary uncertainty as he processed the fact that their intended victim had effortlessly controlled both of them, while maintaining perfect composure throughout the encounter. The silence in room 142 was broken by the sound of slow, deliberate applause from Emma Rodriguez, who had found her voice and her courage in witnessing her teacher's demonstration of authentic strength. Her clapping was soon joined by other students who recognized that they had witnessed something remarkable, something that went far beyond typical classroom management or disciplinary procedures. Rachel looked out at her students, her breathing still controlled and centered, her posture reflecting the integration of strength and composure that had taken years to develop. The torn cardigan still hung from her shoulders, but somehow she no longer looked vulnerable or diminished. Instead, she appeared more substantial and present than she had ever seemed before, as if revealing her true capabilities had allowed her to occupy her full space in the world. "Now," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had commanded the room moments before, "let's return to our discussion of quadratic functions. I believe we were exploring how the discriminant determines the nature of a parabola's roots." She turned back to the whiteboard, her movements fluid and confident, and continued writing the equation exactly where she had left off. The remainder of the class period passed in unusual quiet, with students completing assigned work with a focus and attention that was remarkable for its intensity and consistency. Marcus and his friends made no further attempts at disruption, their previous arrogance replaced by a careful neutrality that suggested they had learned important lessons about the consequences of underestimating their targets. Emma Rodriguez found herself taking more detailed notes than usual, her admiration for her teacher growing as she reflected on the strength and composure Rachel had demonstrated under circumstances that would have left most people devastated and helpless. The gentle woman who had encouraged her mathematical growth possessed depths and capabilities that extended far beyond anything she had imagined. As the bell-ending third period created a release of tension that was almost audible, students gathered their belongings and filed out of room 142 with unusual orderliness. Many of them stole final glances at their teacher as they processed what they had witnessed, recognizing that they had been present for something that would be talked about and remembered for years to come. Marcus and his friends were among them. First to leave, their hasty exit suggesting they had no desire to risk further confrontation with someone they now recognized as far more formidable than they had imagined. The careful distance they maintained from Rachel's desk as they gathered their materials spoke to their new understanding of the balance of power in room 142. David Chun appeared in the doorway as the last student departed, his concern for Rachel's well-being overriding his usual respect for her privacy and independence. His experienced eye immediately took in the destroyed Cardigan and the unusual quality of silence that suggested something significant had occurred during the third period. "Rachel," he said quietly, stepping into the classroom and closing the door behind him. "Are you all right? What happened here?" His questions were gentle but persistent, reflecting his recognition that something had changed in fundamental ways that would require careful processing and support. Rachel turned to face him, her movements still reflecting the centered balance that had carried her through the confrontation with Marcus and his friends. For the first time in 7 years, she felt completely authentic, completely herself, operating from a place of genuine strength rather than the defensive vulnerability that had characterized her teaching career. "I'm more than all right," she replied, her voice carrying a confidence and presence that David had never heard before. "For the first time in a very long time, I feel like myself again." She looked down at the torn fabric of her cardigan, then back at her colleague with an expression that combined vulnerability with strength in ways that defied simple categorization. The transformation was complete. Rachel Martinez, mathematics teacher, had become Rachel Martinez, an integrated human being, someone who no longer needed to choose between strength and compassion, between her warrior past and her educator present. The careful separation she had maintained for 7 years was ending, and something new and more authentic was beginning to emerge from the ruins of her carefully constructed facade. The investigation that followed the incident in room 142 unfolded with the methodical precision of a legal proceeding, transforming what had begun as a moment of teenage cruelty into a comprehensive examination of systemic failures that had allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. Principal Sandra Walsh found herself managing not just a disciplinary case, but a potential media crisis that threatened to expose years of inadequate responses to bullying complaints. Kevin Murphy's phone recording, initially intended as evidence of their triumph over a weak teacher, became the cornerstone of a criminal investigation when his parents discovered the footage during a routine check of his device. The video provided indisputable evidence of the assault on Rachel, but it also captured something unexpected: her remarkably controlled and professional response to an attack that could have justified far more severe retaliation. Detective Lisa Campbell, a 20-year veteran of the Millbrook Police Department who specialized in cases involving violence in educational settings, reviewed the footage with the kind of professional attention that came from years of investigating similar crimes. What she saw challenged her expectations in ways that both impressed and concerned her professional judgment. The video clearly showed Rachel being physically assaulted by multiple students, but her response demonstrated capabilities that suggested extensive training in martial arts or similar disciplines. Detective Campbell recognized that she was dealing with someone who possessed skills that could have inflicted serious injury on the attackers, but had chosen restraint and precise control instead. The criminal charges filed against Marcus Williams, Jason Torres, Kevin Murphy, and Ryan Beck sent shockwaves through Millbrook's tightly knit community, where such serious legal consequences for teenage behavior were virtually unprecedented. The charges included assault, conspiracy, harassment, and destruction of property, with additional considerations for the fact that the attack had been planned and recorded for potential distribution. Marcus's father, Robert Williams, found himself facing a legal and public relations nightmare that threatened both his business interests and his family's standing in the community. The son, whose previous infractions had been dismissed as typical teenage behavior, was now facing potential jail time and permanent criminal records that could affect his college prospects and future opportunities. The revelation that Westfield High School's quiet mathematics teacher was actually Rachel "the Silent Storm" Martinez, former nationally ranked judo champion and Olympic trials qualifier, transformed her overnight from a local footnote into a regional celebrity whose story captured public imagination in ways she had never anticipated. Local news stations picked up the story first, followed by regional outlets and eventually national media organizations that were fascinated by the narrative of a warrior hiding in plain sight who had emerged to defend herself against attackers who had no idea what they were facing. The media attention was both validating and overwhelming for someone who had spent 7 years cultivating anonymity and avoiding any situation that might expose her past achievements. Rachel found herself thrust into a spotlight that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, reminding her of the attention she had once received as a successful competitor, while forcing her to navigate questions about personal choices and professional decisions that she had never expected to discuss publicly. Reporters camped outside her apartment building in the school, seeking interviews and additional details about her competition career and the circumstances that had led her to abandon martial arts for education. The school board's emergency meeting to address the incident became a contentious affair as community members debated whether Rachel's hidden martial arts expertise represented a safety concern or a valuable asset for maintaining school security. Some parents expressed concerns about having someone with such capabilities working with their children, while others praised her restraint and professionalism in dealing with a dangerous situation. The student body's reaction to the revelations about their mathematics teacher ranged from shock and admiration to fear and resentment, depending on their previous relationships with Rachel and their attitudes toward authority figures in general. Emma Rodriguez became something of a celebrity herself as one of the primary witnesses to the classroom confrontation, and her articulate descriptions of Rachel's composure and restraint under extreme provocation helped shape public perception of the incident. "She could have seriously hurt them," Emma told a local television reporter. "You could see that she knew exactly what she was doing, but she only used enough force to stop the attack. She was protecting herself, but she was also protecting them from what she could have done if she had really wanted to hurt someone." The transformation in classroom dynamics was immediate and profound, with students who had previously viewed Rachel as someone to be manipulated or ignored suddenly recognizing that they were dealing with someone who commanded respect through genuine strength rather than institutional authority. Her lessons took on new energy as students who had been disengaged or disruptive found themselves genuinely curious about the person behind the carefully constructed professional facade. Mathematical discussions became more dynamic and honest as students felt safe to explore complex concepts with someone they now recognized as possessing both intellectual depth and personal courage. Rachel's approach to teaching remained fundamentally unchanged, but her presence in the classroom carried a new quality of authentic authority that made genuine education possible in ways it had never been before. The legal proceedings against Marcus and his accomplices unfolded over several months, during which Rachel was required to testify about both the assault itself and her response to it. Her testimony was measured and professional, acknowledging her training while emphasizing her commitment to using minimal force necessary to protect herself and maintain classroom order. The defense attorney's attempts to portray her as a dangerous individual who had overreacted to teenage pranks were undermined by the video evidence and witness testimony that clearly showed her restraint and proportional response to a serious assault. The prosecution's presentation of her background and training helped the court Understand that her response represented remarkable self-control rather than excessive force. Master James Watanabe traveled from his dojo in Philadelphia to testify about Rachel's character and training, providing context for understanding both her capabilities and her commitment to using them responsibly. His testimony about the philosophical foundations of judo training, particularly the emphasis on protecting rather than harming opponents, helped the court appreciate the discipline and restraint Rachel had demonstrated during the incident. Rachel Martinez represents everything we hope to achieve through martial arts training, Master Watanabe told the court. She possesses extraordinary physical capabilities, but more importantly, she has the wisdom and self-control to use them appropriately. Her response to this attack demonstrated perfect application of judo principles, neutralized the threat while minimizing harm to all parties involved. The sentencing hearing provided Rachel with an opportunity to address her attackers directly, and her statement became a defining moment in the case that was widely reported and discussed in local media. She spoke about the impact of their actions not only on her personally, but on the classroom environment and the other students who had been forced to witness their cruel behavior. Your actions were designed to humiliate me and establish your dominance over someone you perceived as weak, she said, looking directly at Marcus and his friends. But what you actually accomplished was to expose your own insecurity and need to hurt others in order to feel powerful. I hope you will use this experience to understand that true strength comes from building others up, not tearing them down. Marcus Williams's conviction and sentencing to community service, counseling, and a permanent criminal record marked the end of his reign of intimidation at Westfield High School, while sending the clear message to other potential bullies about the serious consequences of their actions. His public apology, delivered as part of his sentencing requirements, acknowledged not only the criminal nature of his assault on Rachel, but the broader pattern of harassment that had characterized his behavior throughout high school. The apology was grudging and incomplete, motivated more by legal requirements than genuine remorse, but it represented a recognition of responsibility that marked the beginning of a long process of accountability and potential rehabilitation. The community service assignment that required him to work with anti-bullying organizations under supervision provided opportunities for him to understand the impact of his behavior from the perspective of victims rather than perpetrators. Jason Torres, Kevin Murphy, and Ryan Beck received similar sentences, though their responses to the legal consequences varied significantly based on their individual circumstances and family support systems. Jason's anger management issues were addressed through mandatory counseling that helped him understand the connections between his aggressive behavior and his parents' difficult divorce. Kevin's fascination with documenting cruelty was redirected through community service that required him to create educational materials about the harmful effects of cyberbullying. Ryan's psychological evaluation revealed underlying issues that required more intensive therapeutic intervention, though his response to treatment was complicated by his apparent lack of empathy for the victims of his psychological manipulation. His rehabilitation became a longer-term project that would require sustained professional support and monitoring. The broader impact of the incident extended far beyond the immediate participants to encompass changes in school policy, community attitudes, and regional discussions about bullying prevention and response. Westfield High School implemented comprehensive anti-bullying programs that emphasized both prevention and intervention, while the Millbrook community began conversations about the cultural factors that had allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. Rachel's story became a catalyst for examining assumptions about strength, vulnerability, and the ways that appearances could deceive even careful observers. The revelation of her background prompted discussions about professional disclosure requirements and the extent to which employees should be required to reveal personal capabilities or training that might be relevant to their work environments. Educational Policy experts debated whether Rachel's undisclosed martial arts expertise represented a breach of professional transparency or simply personal privacy that had no bearing on her teaching qualifications. The conversations highlighted broader questions about the balance between institutional security concerns and individual rights to privacy about past achievements or capabilities. As the immediate crisis subsided and normal routines resumed, Rachel found herself fundamentally changed by the experience of acknowledging and integrating the different aspects of her identity that she had kept carefully separated for 7 years. The warrior consciousness that had emerged during the confrontation with Marcus and his friends could no longer be suppressed or ignored, but neither could the genuine passion for education and student development that had motivated her career. Transition. The challenge became finding ways to honor both aspects of herself while building a life that felt authentic and sustainable. The decision to embrace rather than hide her martial arts background opened opportunities that Rachel had never considered during her years of self-imposed anonymity. Local law enforcement agencies approached her about providing self-defense training for officers and community members, while regional schools sought her expertise in developing anti-bullying programs that combined educational approaches with practical security measures. The recognition that her unique combination of teaching skills and martial arts capabilities could serve broader community needs represented a potential career path that had never existed when she was forced to choose between judo and education. Relationship with David Chun evolved during this period of transformation and growth, deepening from professional friendship to romantic partnership as they navigated the challenges and opportunities that emerged from Rachel's newfound public profile. David's unwavering support during her most vulnerable and confusing period had created a foundation for intimate relationships built on mutual respect, shared values, and complementary strengths. Their engagement announcement in the local newspaper became another chapter in the ongoing story that had captured community imagination and inspired broader conversations about courage, authenticity, and the power of love to heal trauma and support growth. The wedding planning process provided opportunities for Rachel to reconnect with her martial arts community for the first time since her abrupt departure from competition 7 years earlier. Master Watanabe served as one of the officiants in a ceremony that acknowledged both her educational career and her martial arts heritage, while former training partners and competitors attended as honored guests who celebrated her integration of warrior values with civilian life. The ceremony itself reflected Rachel's journey from hiding to authenticity, with elements that honored her teaching profession, while acknowledging the physical and mental disciplines that had shaped her character. The honeymoon trip to Japan allowed Rachel and David to visit traditional dojos and training centers where Rachel could study teaching methods that integrated martial arts philosophy with educational practice. The experience of training with masters who had spent decades perfecting the balance between physical technique and moral development provided Rachel with insights that would influence her continued work in educator training and anti-bullying. Curriculum development. The establishment of the Martinez Institute for Character Development and Educational Safety at Pennsylvania State University provided an institutional home for the research and training programs that had grown out of Rachel's work with individual schools and districts. The Institute's mission reflected her integrated approach to education that recognized the connections between physical safety, emotional well-being, and academic achievement in creating environments where all students could reach their full potential. The endowment funding for the Institute came from a combination of government grants, corporate sponsorships, and individual donations that demonstrated broad community support for evidence-based approaches to educational improvement. The initial research projects focused on measuring the long-term impact of comprehensive anti-bullying programs on school culture, student achievement, and community safety. Rachel's evolution from hidden warrior to public advocate had required her to develop new skills in organizational management, public speaking, and media relations that complemented her original expertise in education and martial arts. The woman who had once been terrified of drawing attention to herself now commanded audiences of thousands with confidence and authenticity that reflected her comfort with all aspects of her identity. The integration of her various capabilities had created a unique professional profile that allowed her to address complex social problems from multiple perspectives while maintaining credibility with diverse stakeholder groups. Her presentations drew on both her educational training and her martial arts background to offer perspectives on conflict resolution that emphasized de-escalation, appropriate use of force, and the psychological dynamics that allowed aggressive behavior to flourish in institutional settings. What set Rachel apart from other speakers and consultants was her lived experience of facing genuine physical threat while maintaining professional responsibility, creating a credibility that resonated with audiences who dealt with similar challenges in their own work environments. Her training programs combined practical self-defense techniques with educational theory and classroom management strategies, providing educators with tools they could use to protect themselves while maintaining focus on their primary mission of student development. The first major research study conducted through the Martinez Institute examined the outcomes of implementing comprehensive character development programs in 50 schools across Pennsylvania, comparing traditional disciplinary approaches with the integrated programs that Rachel had developed. The preliminary results showed significant improvements not only in reducing incidents of bullying and violence, but also in enhancing overall school climate, student engagement, and academic performance across all demographic groups. The data suggested that creating environments where students felt safe and supported had ripple effects that extended far beyond preventing individual incidents of harassment. Schools implementing Rachel's programs showed improved graduation rates, increased college enrollment, and better long-term career outcomes for students who attended institutions where character development was prioritized alongside academic achievement. These findings attracted national attention from policymakers and educational leaders who were seeking evidence-based approaches to addressing school violence and creating positive learning environments. Rachel's testimony before congressional committees examining federal education policy helped shape legislation that provided funding for comprehensive anti-bullying programs while establishing standards for educator safety training that reflected her integration of physical preparedness with educational professionalism. The influence she gained through these appearances allowed her to advocate for approaches that address systemic issues rather than simply responding to individual incidents after they occurred. Her recommendations emphasized the importance of creating school cultures where respect and mutual support were valued and modeled by adults, rather than relying solely on punitive measures to address problems after they had already caused harm. The documentary film about Rachel's journey from hidden warrior to educational leader premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival to critical acclaim and audience enthusiasm that reflected broader public hunger for authentic stories of personal transformation and social impact. The film, titled The Silent Storm: Finding Strength in Service, followed Rachel through a typical week that included teaching her advanced mathematics classes, conducting educator training sessions, working with Marcus Williams on his community service projects, and planning expansion of the Institute's programs. The intimate portrayal of her daily life revealed the complexity of maintaining multiple identities while serving community needs that extended far beyond any single role or profession. The film captured both her moments of vulnerability and her demonstrations of extraordinary capability, showing how the integration of her warrior past with her educator present had created possibilities for contribution and impact that exceeded anything she could have achieved by hiding behind partial truths. The international distribution of the documentary brought Rachel's story to global audiences, who were dealing with similar challenges related to school violence, bullying prevention, and the integration of safety concerns with educational missions. Educators from countries as diverse as Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom reached out to learn about her training methods and curriculum development approaches, leading to consulting opportunities that would expand her influence beyond the American educational system. The recognition that her work had global relevance and application provided validation for the years of struggle and growth that had transformed her from victim to advocate. The Institute began developing international partnerships for implementing character development programs in educational systems. Facing similar challenges with youth violence and social dysfunction, Marcus Williams's transformation from high school bully to dedicated youth advocate had become one of the most compelling examples of the rehabilitative potential that existed when appropriate interventions were applied with consistency and genuine care. His community service assignment had included working directly with Rachel on anti-bullying initiatives, creating an uncomfortable but educational dynamic that forced him to confront the human impact of his actions while providing him with models of constructive behavior. The mentoring relationship that developed between Rachel and Marcus during his community service hours surprised everyone involved, including Marcus himself, who had expected continued hostility and rejection from the boss and from the woman he had attacked. Instead, he encountered someone who held him accountable for his actions, while simultaneously recognizing his potential for growth and positive contribution to community welfare. Rachel's approach to his rehabilitation drew on her understanding of martial arts philosophy, which emphasized that true strength came from self-control and service to others, rather than domination and intimidation. Marcus's transformation from arrogant bully to thoughtful advocate for anti-violence initiatives became one of the most powerful aspects of the broader story, demonstrating that even the most hardened perpetrators could change when confronted with appropriate consequences and positive role models. His testimony at subsequent court cases involving school violence carried particular weight because of his authentic understanding of the motivations and mindset that drove such behavior. Combined with his first-hand experience of facing someone who could have destroyed him but chose restraint and education instead, Marcus's journey from perpetrator to advocate provided hope that cycles of violence could be broken through sustained intervention and support. The annual conference hosted by the Martinez Institute had grown from a regional gathering of educators to an international symposium that brought together researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and advocates from dozens of countries. This year's theme, Beyond Prevention, Creating Cultures of Courage and Compassion, reflected the evolution of Rachel's work from reactive responses to bullying toward proactive approaches to character development that empowered individuals and communities to create positive change. The conference sessions ranged from presentations of cutting-edge research to hands-on workshops that allowed participants to experience the training methods firsthand. Rachel's opening keynote address drew on her recent sabbatical years spent studying traditional martial arts philosophies in Asia and their applications to modern educational practice. Her research had taken her to monasteries in Tibet, dojos in Japan, and training centers in Thailand, where she had deepened her understanding of the connections between physical discipline and spiritual development. The insights gained from these experiences were influencing her work on a new curriculum that integrated contemplative practices with safety, training, and character education. The most moving moment of the conference came during a panel discussion featuring former students from Westfield High School who had been present during the original incident in room 142. Their perspectives on how that experience had shaped their understanding of courage, justice, and personal responsibility provided powerful testimony to the long-term impact of witnessing authentic leadership under extreme pressure. Emma Rodriguez, now pursuing a doctoral degree in educational psychology, spoke about how watching Rachel's response to the assault had influenced her own career goals and personal philosophy. She showed us that you don't have to choose between being strong and being kind, Emma told the audience. Real power comes from having the ability to hurt someone but choosing to help them instead. Several other panelists had pursued careers in education, law enforcement, or social work specifically because of the inspiration they had, drawn from Rachel's example of integrating strength with compassion. Their stories demonstrated the ripple effects that authentic leadership could create, influencing young people to see service and protection of others as worthy life goals. David Rodriguez, now superintendent of the Millbrook School District, had implemented Rachel's training programs throughout all schools under his supervision, creating a model educational system that other districts sought to emulate. His administrative leadership had been crucial in demonstrating that comprehensive character development programs could be successfully integrated into existing educational structures without compromising academic standards or increasing operational costs. The success of the Millbrook schools had influenced state education policy and federal funding priorities for character education initiatives. The district's achievement data showed consistent improvements in academic performance alongside dramatic reductions in disciplinary incidents, providing empirical support for Rachel's integrated approach to education and safety. The personal costs of Rachel's public role had been balanced by the deep satisfaction she found in work that aligned with her deepest values and utilized all aspects of her capabilities. The integration of her martial arts background with her educational expertise had created opportunities for service that she could never have imagined during her years of hiding and self-denial. Her confident stride, warm smile, and the genuine respect she commanded from students and colleagues alike reflected a journey of integration and authenticity that had transformed not only her own life, but the lives of countless others who had been touched by her story and her work. The educational center that bore her name had become a flagship institution for innovative approaches to character development and safety training that attracted visitors from around the world. The global reach of the documentaries had made Rachel's story a touchstone for discussions about courage, authenticity, and the power of individuals to create positive change in their communities. Educational leaders from around the world cited her example when developing their own approaches to character development and safety training. The Martinez Foundation had grown beyond its original focus on anti-bullying programs to encompass broader initiatives addressing youth development, educator training, and community safety. The Foundation's work now included scholarship programs for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, research grants for innovative educational approaches, and consulting services for organizations seeking to implement character development programs. The expansion reflected Rachel's recognition that preventing violence required addressing the underlying social and economic factors that contributed to aggressive behavior and social dysfunction. The Foundation's holistic approach to community development had become a model for how educational institutions could serve as catalysts for broader social change. The research conducted through the Martinez Institute was beginning to show measurable impacts on entire communities, not just individual schools. Cities that had implemented comprehensive character development programs showed reductions in juvenile crime rates, increases in community volunteerism, and improvements in economic development indicators that reflected the broader social benefits of creating environments where young people could develop their full potential. Rachel's keynote address at the anniversary conference reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her from the hidden shrine in her apartment, where she had stored her martial arts trophies, to this position of international influence and recognition. The most important lesson she had learned, she told the audience, was that true strength was not about the ability to defeat opponents, but about the courage to remain true to one's authentic self while serving purposes larger than personal comfort or security. "I spent 7 years trying to hide who I really was," she said, looking out at an audience that included former students, colleagues, and fellow advocates who had been inspired by her example. I thought that strength and gentleness were incompatible, that I had to choose between being a warrior and being an educator. What I learned that day in my classroom was that integration, not separation, is the path to authentic power and meaningful service. The standing ovation that followed her remarks represented not only appreciation for her individual courage, recognition of the broader transformation she represented, the possibility that ordinary people could find extraordinary strength when circumstances demanded nothing less than heroism. The audience included dozens of educators who had implemented her training programs, former students who had been inspired by her example, and community leaders who had witnessed the positive changes that resulted from prioritizing character development alongside academic achievement. The legacy that Rachel was building through her integrated approach to education and safety was already influencing a new generation of educators who understood that their responsibilities extended beyond subject matter instruction to include MODELING, courage, integrity, and the appropriate use of personal power in service of community welfare. Teacher training programs that incorporated her curriculum were producing graduates who felt prepared to handle the complex challenges of modern education, while maintaining focus on the fundamental mission of helping young people develop their intellectual, emotional, and moral capabilities. The future held possibilities that Rachel was only beginning to explore, including plans for expanding the educational center into a full university focused on character development and ethical leadership, international partnerships for implementing her programs in developing countries, and research initiatives examining the connections between individual character development and broader social transformation. The shy teacher who had once hidden her true capabilities behind mathematical equations had become a confident leader whose work was helping to create a more just and compassionate world for future generations. Her journey from victim to advocate had demonstrated that personal trauma could be transformed into community service when approached with courage, wisdom, and commitment to purposes larger than individual comfort. The legacy would continue through the thousands of students, educators, and community leaders who had been influenced by Rachel's example and who would carry forward the principles of integrated strength and compassionate leadership into their own spheres of influence and responsibility. The quiet revolution that had begun in room 142 would ripple outward through generations of young people who had learned that true power came not from the ability to harm others, but from the wisdom to protect and serve those who needed support and guidance. The mathematics teacher who had once calculated only equations now computed the infinite possibilities that emerged when authentic strength was applied to the challenges facing communities around the world. Her greatest lesson remained elegantly simple, that the most profound transformations began not with grand gestures, but with the decision to stop hiding who you really are and start using your gifts in service of others who need what you have to offer. The story was complete, but the impact would continue forever. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.